I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that.
Joe Biden knew what expanding NATO towards Russia would mean. This clip is from 1997. It's 2022 now, and the reaction has become military.
Breaking news on the Ukraine crisis. Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced...
While Putin said his special military operation is in part related to what he calls genocide in eastern Ukraine, it is difficult to ignore the role of the American-led military alliance known as NATO in influencing Putin's decisions. Disclaimer here, this is not a video made to justify the suffering and death of many innocent civilians in Ukraine, but rather is an analysis of why Vladimir Putin is convinced that what he's doing is akin to self-defense under the wider geopolitical context of the confrontation between Russia, NATO, and the United States of America.
We have made it clear that any further NATO movement to the east is unacceptable.
Я знаю, как принимается. Когда страна становится членом НАТО, ей уже очень трудно сопротивляться давлению со стороны такой крупной страны, лидера НАТО, как США. И там легко может появиться все, что угодно.
Ukraine has been mulling over the idea of joining NATO for some time now, and this is exactly what upset Vladimir Putin. The military alliance was formed back in 1949 to counter the advancement of the Soviet Union, and after the latter fell apart in 1991, NATO, which would have fulfilled its historical purpose, rather than disbanding, kept expanding eastward. This was seen as a major threat in the eyes of Putin and a major source of his strategic distrust of the West.
We said not an inch to the east. That was the NATO guarantee in 1990. So what became of that? They fooled us.
A major goal of his operation is the so-called neutralization of Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign country, which should be free to determine its own path. That is very true. But some say there's another angle here.
Does anyone really believe that the United States would not have something to say if, for example, Mexico or Cuba or any country in Central or Latin America were to form a military alliance with the U.S. adversary? Do you think that members of Congress would stand up and say, well, you know, Mexico is an independent country. They have the right to do anything they want? I doubt that very much.
U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders made this speech in early February before this conflict broke out, so we shouldn't consider this as his current stance on the issue, but he did detail exactly Putin's line of thinking.
We are not deploying our missiles over at the borders of the US. No. On the other hand, the US is deploying its missiles close to our home, on the porch of our house.
Whether this justifies his controversial military decision is another matter, but it is clear that Putin sees Ukraine as the crux of a geopolitical arm wrestle between Russia and the US and its allies. Since he has sent troops, tanks, and planes into Ukraine, Russian-NATO relations have become ever more complicated. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson wrote in an op-ed for the New York Times on March the 6th that this is not a NATO conflict. But in many ways, it already is. In less than a week's time, the US and NATO have sent over 17,000 anti-tank weapons into Ukraine. Political experts have said that NATO has been in search of an overarching purpose since the USSR fell. Well, its officials said earlier in February that they're now more unified than ever.